Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. All right, everybody, it's good to have you back for another episode of Off the Comma, and we just continue powering through these really amazing stories and these amazing people who are sharing their stories with us. I'm so excited to be back again this week with another story and another new acquaintance to me. So again, I'm talking to someone who I haven't met before, so I'm looking forward to meeting him on this episode, hearing his story and about him for the first time, and also being able to create a space for him to be able to share what's important to him and his experiences with being stuck. So I will quit rambling and I'm going to hand it over to Doug Noll. And Doug, take it from here. Tell us, how would you like to be known and what would you like for us to know about you before we actually start getting into your story?
Well, Paul, that's an interesting question with interesting possibilities of answers. First of all, I'm a human being. I'm a he, him. But I think that the way that I would describe myself today is I'm a lawyer-turned-peacemaker. And I turned 74 in a couple of weeks, and I'm devoting the rest of my career to teaching people a skill that allows them to stop fights and arguments forever in their lives. And that's been an evolution of my growth and development as a human being and a professional over 45 years of professional practice, first as a lawyer and then as a peacemaker.
Okay. Peacemaker, I'm definitely hearing, and already my ears have perked up. I'm very interested in that. That resonates very much so with me. Is this going to unfold in your story, or is there? I'm curious to know more about what peacemaking means to you, but I don't want to steal it from your story if you're going to be getting there.
No, that's quite all right. Peacemaking is a word that has a lot of baggage, and peacemaker has a lot of baggage. And when I first, well, maybe I should tell a little bit about the backstory because then it gives some context. So,
okay, yeah.
As we were talking, we both live in California. I'm a native Californian. I grew up in Southern California, ended up going to Dartmouth College back east, came back to California, went to law school up in Sacramento where you live. Mm-hmm. And then out of law school, moved here to Central California to work for state appellate judges as law clerk for a year. Mm-hmm. And then went into private practice in 1978. I joined the firm that I joined in September of 78, tried my first jury trial in October of 78. And then my second jury trial was the defense of a $36 million securities fraud case involving Bakersfield almonds in San Diego, in the federal court in San Diego. And that was started in December of 78. And that's how my career started. For the next 22 years, I was a trial lawyer, trying fairly large, complex business and commercial cases. Through a series of events that I won't bore you with, I ended up going back to school in mid-career in my late 40s to earn my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies because I felt that I was not serving people as a lawyer. I think I could serve more people if I could help them resolve their conflicts before they got into the litigation process. So I earned my master's degree. And it was an amazing, eye-opening experience for me to learn all about human conflict and what's required for there to be peace. So I walked out of the law firm with a week's notice. My partners gave me ultimatums. That was not a good thing to do with me. I don't do well with ultimatums. And I left $10 million on the table and just walked out. And I didn't want to be a regular lawyer mediator. where you're just kind of working with litigated disputes. And I do that work, but I was really called to help people deal with intractable conflicts where emotions very high and where litigation was not a good option. And I was trying to think about, well, how do I brand myself? And the only thing I could think of was peacemaker, but because that's exactly what I did. In my work, success is reconciliation. Success is taking people who hate each other's guts, who have a relationship, but for some reason hate each other's guts, and reconcile them so that they can at least get along with each other and hopefully reestablish their relationship. And there are processes that I've developed that allow me to do that, help people reconcile. That's peacemaking.
Yeah.
Taking people in conflict and bringing them to a place of peace in their lives. But so I call myself a lawyer-turned-peacemaker, but I'm fully aware that the term peacemaker is loaded with baggage, religious baggage, spiritual baggage, Colt 45 peacemaker, violent baggage. It's a loaded term, but I spent a lot of money with marketing companies trying to come up with something better. Nobody could really come up with a better word. And because it really describes what I do as a practitioner and a scholar and a teacher and a coach.
Well, and it's fascinating to me because, and obviously, like you said, the baggage is going to come depending on worldview, personal lenses, background, history, et cetera.
Exactly.
I kind of took it just straight off the bat the way I believe you intend it. And also what comes up for me is it's like peace facilitator. I mean, this isn't a marketing session. You're not asking, but what I'm hearing you describe is there was a big shift for you and you shifted into wanting to help people come together and create peace between them. And it strikes me as the skill sets as a lawyer probably very much are part of the toolkit, and support the work that you do now.
Well, yes, that's true. I mean, as both a person who's practiced law for a long time and as a law professor, having taught law for a long time, I have a deep, academic and practical education and experience level in law, and it helps me understand the overall context of a problem. And although when I'm mediating, I'm obviously not acting as a lawyer, so I'm not giving legal advice. I can see what a court would do with a particular problem if it ended up in litigation. And I can tell people, based on my experience and based on my understanding in particular of the law of remedies, this is what's probably going to happen. And so you're negotiating against this outcome that is more likely than not to occur in court. And it also allows me, it helps to deflate expectation, because what not even most lawyers realize this, but the law of remedies, which dictates how you measure damages, for example, in a lawsuit. You hear about these cases of millions of dollars in damages. Well, the law of remedies just states the rules of how you measure, how you come up with that number. And the fundamental principle is that the law of remedies is designed to put the plaintiff, the person who's been injured, back in his rightful position where he would have been without the injury at the least cost. So, and it's at that least cost that people don't get. So the law is extremely conservative in terms of how it's going to recompense people who have been injured in one way or another. And a lot of people don't get that. They think it's the other way around. They think that they're on the merry-go-round, they're going to get the lucky golden ring and make millions of dollars and live happily ever after. And that's just not how the law works at all.
Yeah.
If you have a multi-million-dollar claim, you have suffered a lot more than what a multi-million-dollar damage award will give you. You'll never be made whole.
I know we're going to get into your story, and I'm really curious, like, what shifted for you to go from the practice of law, teaching of law, into peacemaking? And if that's where you're going with your story, then just tell me. But if not, then
I can.
Like, what shifted? Like, what was the thing that moved you?
It was about a 15-year process, maybe 10 years. So I took up the martial arts in the mid 80s, in my mid 30s. And I just took up the martial arts, and I started studying a northern Chinese kung fu style called Shoshu, which is a very violent form of street fighting. I was awarded my second degree black belt around my 40th birthday in 1990. And my teacher, who is a phenomenal martial artist and a phenomenal teacher, said, "I'm not going to teach you anymore. You're arrogant. You're an asshole. You're going to hurt somebody." And he laughed. Because we really respected each other. And he said, "You go study Tai Chi as a martial art." So everybody knows about Tai Chi is this floating thing that old people do in the parks, and that's true. Those forms are like that. However, Tai Chi, when studied as a martial art, is something very, very different. It is the most deadly martial art there is.
Hmm.
And all martial arts originate with Tai Chi. Tai Chi has two interesting paradoxes. The first is the softer you are, the stronger you are. And the second paradox is the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are.
Hmm.
Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. Did not compute.
Immediately what came to mind, I'm a sci-fi buff. That's what I read from the Dune Chronicles. The slow blade penetrates the shield, right?
Right,
All the
exactly.
metaphors. Yeah.
Exactly. So I started studying Tai Chi as a martial art and began to teach Tai Chi. And then several years later, I was in the courtroom cross-examining somebody, and I thought, what the heck am I doing in here? And that's when the shift occurred. It was the Tai Chi that set me up to recognize that I didn't have being a litigator, warrior mentality. That was false. It was a false reality. And so I went on a whitewater trip right after that trial with a bunch of friends. We had a permit to run the main salmon. So I spent the week in my raft all by myself, powering through these big waves, thinking about how many people I'd really served as a trial lawyer. And over 20 years, I could only count 5 people.
Wow.
And I said, I'm not going to do this for another 30 years and only help 15 or 20 people. That's not who I am. That's not what I'm here for. I had no clue what I was going to do. Come back to town after that trip. I'm driving down out of the mountains to our law office, and I hear what turned out to be the one and only public service announcement, PSA, for a new master's degree program in peacemaking and conflict studies being offered at a local private university, Fresno Pacific, which is a Mennonite school. And it caught my attention. And to make a long story short, I enrolled. They accepted me. I was the first lawyer in their program. They accepted me. And I spent 3 years studying peacemaking, conflict studies. I looked at human conflict in every conceivable, imaginable way. I learned so much. It was amazing. It's the first time since law school when I was doing a reading, all the reading I had to do, I had 2 or 3 dictionaries sitting around me because, in one reading, I'm reading theological stuff. Well, they have their own jargon. And then I'm into social psychology and they've got their jargon. Then I'm into linguistics and they've got their own jargon. And so the thing about conflict studies, peacemaking and conflict studies, is multidisciplinary. It's not just one discipline. All the knowledge, human knowledge, comes to bear on what do we fight about, how do we fight about it, why do we fight about it, and how do we stop the fighting.
Yeah. Well, and just the way to even begin to facilitate peace is to understand all the languages
that's right.
Or try to, or attempt to, or what have you, like all the languages, all the perspectives, all the points of view. Yeah.
So what happened was that, as I mentioned a moment ago, it kind of came to a head at the law firm. I was the second largest earner in the firm. I had put in $10 million in revenues, and I'd taken out. And some of my partners were really pissed at me because I wasn't going to try. The golden goose was walking away. I wasn't going to try cases anymore. So the managing partner gave me an ultimatum. He was my peer. We graduated from law school at the same time. He said, stop this peacemaking stuff or you're not getting any more paychecks. And that was on Friday. I came back on Monday to say I quit. And I left the practice of law cold on the following Friday.
It sounds like, even though you said it was years in the making, but I mean, in the telling of the story, there's literally a series of events that led up to kind of a personal realization. And then the pathway may not have felt clear at the time, but in retrospect is kind of pretty direct, wasn't it? From there forward.
It was amazing. I did everything that I tell my clients not to do. No business plan, no savings, no idea what I'm going to do. I just felt this is the right thing to do. And so I followed my heart. And it turned out to be the best decision I ever made in my life.
Wonderful. I think this is really cool. And certainly the peacemaking piece resonates with me. Okay, let's jump into your story here. So, and you've already shared a big part of your story too, but let's jump on into whatever else is there to tell in your story. Before we get into the 5 questions, one of the things I do with all my guests is, as you think about, Doug, the next half an hour ahead in the telling of your story, what intention would you have for yourself today in sharing this story?
I guess the word I have is hope, and the ability to make a life for yourself that you could have never imagined 20 or 30 years ago. And my story illustrates that. I was born in 1950, partially blind, partially deaf, bad teeth, 2 club feet, and left-handed. I had to have surgeries on my legs to straighten them out. Couldn't walk until I was 3.5 or 4 years old. And in those days, parents were raising their children under the rubric of a guy by the name of Benjamin Spock, who was a pediatrician who stated that if you provide emotional support for your children, you're going to ruin them. Turns out to be absolutely the worst advice you can give to a parent to raise children. So I grew up in affluence, and I grew up with parents who loved me. I had a lot of disabilities, but nobody was able to support me emotionally. And so that's what happens when you're not emotionally supported. I built all kinds of defense mechanisms around being hurt all the time, emotionally hurt. So I became arrogant. I was smart and a little too smart, I think. You know how it is with a kid who knows everything. And it was not a happy childhood. And I could hardly wait to get out. But even though I left and went as far away from California as I possibly could to Hanover, New Hampshire, to Dartmouth College, I was running from the problem. And the problems followed me through college and followed me through law school. You know, and it just took a long time to finally settle into myself, accept me for who I am. I overcame these disabilities. I've got all kinds of, the things I've done in my life. I'm a level 3 certified ski instructor. I used to be a rock climber, used to do class 4 whitewater kayaking, and still do some rafting, sailed all over the place. You know, I'm an airplane pilot, helicopter pilot, instrument rated. I've just got all these things that I've done over the years. And those accomplishments are just, it's not that they don't mean anything to me, but what it illustrated to me was that no matter what burden is cast upon you, if you are willing to do the work, you can be accomplished. And I think that, and once you achieve a certain amount of accomplishment, you create meaning in your life. And it's the meaning in life. For me, it's service to humanity. And that's where happiness originates. And I'll have to tell you, Paul, it's only been in the last, well, it's been since about 2004, 2005 that I've truly been happy in my life. I'm in my mid-50s. I finally found happiness.
There's so much that you've shared, and I just want to acknowledge you for that and all of these things, especially in the describing. What I'm taking from that is there's the accomplishment, and then there's the process of accomplishing, and that process of accomplishing is sort of a proving and a testing and a validating kind of space. And so it's almost like if you direct that energy in any direction, you can have the thing. The emphasis is really on the effort and the energy that you're putting into the intention.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, for example, I don't own a television set. I haven't owned a television set for 40 years. I don't watch television. I only do those things that I can really commit to. That's why I don't play golf. I couldn't commit to the 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 hours of practice it would take for me to become a scratch golfer. Wasn't interested in that. But I was interested in becoming a level 3 certified ski instructor. So I put in the 4,000 or 5,000 hours of skiing necessary to get to that level of skiing. So one of the things you have to learn is I've learned that discipline, persistence, patience, all are really important. Developing those skills, those attributes to push you through the hard stuff. Always be a beginner at something.
Okay.
Even if you're an expert. Always be a beginner at something that you're an expert at. Learn something new.
Well, let's hear how it shapes out. Let me jump into the first of the 5 questions. So, and then kind of just expand here. So, Doug, where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma? You've described some, but what's the focus of the story today?
I would say the first comma was that aha moment in the courtroom. When I said, what the heck am I doing in here? Because I totally identified as a trial lawyer. I was making a good living as a trial lawyer. I had a lot of respect. I was one of the most respected and feared trial lawyers in the region. Judges would kick me out of their chambers because they didn't get out of here, Noel. I don't want to work so hard. Go get another job. It's happened to me multiple times.
Wow.
And the comma was when I said, what am I doing in here? And I had no idea what was going to happen next.
Mm.
I just knew that trying cases was no longer my jam.
So no idea what was next. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I had no idea what I was going to do next. And that opened me up 10 days later or 2 weeks later to be listening to the radio and hearing that public service announcement for a master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. I'd never considered the idea of either getting a master's degree or becoming a peacemaker. I mean, it was the furthest thing from my mind. And yet 2 weeks later, the opportunity opened up. And I got past the comma onto a whole new path of life.
Well, and it in this story, it happened fairly quickly. Like you said, 2 weeks later, then this new path has presented itself to you, and you've got this sense of I'm all in. Share a little bit more with us, kind of, because that's one of the things we do unpack here is in the comma, that moment, if you will, and then the moments that followed of, I have no idea what I'm going to do next. What was happening for you in that space? So kind of go in deeper into that 2-week period. What was it like for you? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What was going on for you in the depth or the deepest part of that?
I think that at that time, a lot of things had started to, all the Tai Chi work and the martial arts work, all this stuff that I had studied and practiced and gotten very good at, all started to come together. And I recognized, I think that somewhere either before or after this moment, that I had been living a disintegrated life. That on my professional life, very successful trial lawyer, but that work did not support who I really was as a human being. And all this other stuff I was doing, meditation, spiritual practice, martial arts, Tai Chi training, and all the other things, activities and accomplishments I developed completely independent of the law, were who I really was. But I didn't have the insight that I was really living two lives, and that my life was not an integrated life, nor was it that disintegrated life supporting me. And this is the period of time when I began to see that. And then the next step was being fearless, and I am fearless. I mean, I'm not afraid of taking risk if I understand the outcome, and I'm not afraid of doing things very different than anybody else, because I learned how to do that growing up with all my disability. So the idea of going off the beaten path, not doing what other people do, figuring out a way that's my path, was something that I was very familiar with. And so the idea of leaving the practice of law, going in, becoming a peacemaker, I mean, that did evolve. My first step was, okay, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to get my master's degree. And I don't know where it's going to take me, but I'm just going to do it because I need an intellectual challenge. I know I'm not going to be trying law. I don't know where this is going to lead me, but it feels right. So I'm going to do it. And so then once I made that decision and I got accepted and enrolled, then the next 3 years, I mean, it's just, you're in graduate school, right? Full-time graduate school, 10 units per semester and 2,000 pages of reading a week. And I mean, it's like law school all over again. But it was amazing. But you don't have time to really step back and reflect and think about it, because I'm just every week, every semester, it's a whole new, wide eye-opening ideas that are being presented to me by my mentors. And so I didn't really have time to breathe for 3 years. But then when I did have time to breathe, I was still practicing law, still trying cases, but then I was able to get to a place where I said, okay, the firm doesn't want to support me in this. I had felt disillusioned with the people in the law firm. I'd won some big cases, brought in a ton of money. They were not fair, in my opinion, on how they distributed the proceeds from the fees that we've received, that I earned. And they tended to, the people that were on the management committee tended to make sure their nests were feathered before everybody else. And so I wasn't feeling any I had not felt any loyalty. I felt betrayal. So that made it easier to say, screw you. You can have the money. I don't care. I'm going to go do my own thing now, do what I want to do. And I'm going to do it by myself. So nobody can tell me what I can or cannot do. And so that's kind of all the different threads that were in there. So there was a little bit of anger, resentment, but also curiosity and a willingness to take risks. And as I said, this whole new intellectual awakening that occurred within me as a result of my master's studies.
And what I see a lot, in just the short time we've spent together is this general openness, as you said, curiosity, exploring, and it's like generally open. And then when something kind of arrives, you're all in, right? Like even in uncertainty, like you said, like you're very determined and you're very persistent. And it's like, once you know, and then it's time to go on to the next thing.
That's right. I don't have a problem. I don't have a hard problem making tough decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It may take me a while to get there, but once I'm at the decision point, I can make fast decisions, and I don't look back and I don't worry about it.
Okay.
Which is interesting because I teach a graduate course at Pepperdine University called Decision Making Under Stress and Uncertainty.
Interesting. Okay, so what's interesting about that to you? Because you said it's interesting.
Well, I mean, here I am, a person who's practiced decision making my whole career, and then started teaching this course, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, and got into the science of judgment decision making and started looking at, okay, so what's really going on? How do we make decisions? And then I learned some really important things that have just further allowed me to evolve. For example, there is no such thing as rationality. And you talk to any neuroscience, they'll tell you there's no such thing as rationality. That's a fiction. It's the fiction that's been persisted for 4,000 years. We are emotional beings. And every decision we make, every action we take, every behavior we engage in, every thought, emotional. Now we have critical thinking and we can reason, and we have logic, and we have quantitative and qualitative analysis, all this stuff we've got. These are tools, but they don't define the essence of what it means to be human. And so just having that insight.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's even interesting that you say that. I'll self-reference for a moment. I'm a trained and certified life coach and have a career in training and development, facilitation, coaching, and so forth. But, I even kind of made the observation fairly early on in my training, we're talking about the importance of neutral questions and staying completely objective and so forth. And I'm like, even in the act of asking neutral questions, there's such a limitless potential of questions that you could ask. The very act of choosing a question is emotional.
That's right.
Because what made you choose that question over the other question?
That's exactly right.
Coaches critique each other and give feedback on calls. And they're like, well, you could have asked this, you could have asked that, you could have asked this. You're right. I can't ask them all. I have to pick one. So ultimately, what influences that pick?
And what is it? Yeah, where do you make the decision? At the synaptic level, the brain is doing it's a mathematical calculation. What's going to give me more pain? What's going to cause me to avoid more pain? What's going to cause me more pleasure? Or how can I avoid more pain? And at the synaptic level, that's what's going on. It's a simple calculation. And it's all emotion.
Yeah. Well, let me go deeper in that. Let me ask the second question, and you can kind of go back and forth here because it feels like you're still kind of, I feel like you've given us a summary of what the comma was like, where you were, where you kind of come to. But the second question is, Doug, as you look back on the comma that you were sitting on, what did it create for you? Feel like you've partly answered that, but what else would you share with us?
So I started my peacemaking practice in 2000. It was an interesting time because I had a reputation in the region as this hard-ass, kick-ass trial lawyer, very ethical, but very tough. And nobody could conceive of the idea of me being an effective mediator or peacemaker because all they saw was a warrior. But I got a couple of big cases that people brought to me, and we got resolution. I got resolution. Nobody thought it was possible. And so my reputation started to shift from being a litigator to being a mediator. But the one thing that I didn't have was the ability to calm angry people down. And I'd been taught active listening, and I'd done Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. None of that stuff worked. And I know now why it doesn't work, but it never worked. It never has worked. It never will work. But because there wasn't anything else out there for people to teach, that's what they taught.
Mhm.
And even though everybody knows it's worthless, everybody knows that active listening does not work. It just pisses people off. But I think your feeling is X, right? I mean, that's stupid. So I had an insight. And again, this was a culmination of all of my experience and my studies, especially in neuroscience, because in my master's degree program, I got introduced to John Ullman, who was a neuroscientist at Caltech in Pasadena, California, near where I grew up. And he sort of got me tutored into neuroscience as a layperson and beginning to understand neuroscience. And because I had the insight that all peace and conflict starts in the human brain, which it does. So I wanted to start understanding how human brains processed this information, all this stuff. And so I did a lot of reading around emotions and human development and went all the way back, 100 years, read Freud, all the people early on, all of them were wrong in terms of what they did. But I learned that. I just learned that, psychology is not a science, it's a social science. It's based on observation, but it's not grounded in hard science like neuroscience is. Anyways, this all led to a huge epiphany in 2005. I was engaged in a mediation in Santa Barbara with this divorced couple. And if there had been knives on the table, there would have been blood on the floor. They were just screaming at each other. And the thought came to me, listen to the emotions. And so instead of having them do my normal mediation process, all I had them do is sit. And I started with her, Susan. I said, Susan, all I want you to do is tell us what you think John's feeling as he tells us his story. Don't worry about his story. I know you disagree with it, but tell us what he's feeling. And at first she struggled with it, but then I coached her and she got it. And 2 hours later, they dismissed the case. They settled the case, recognized how stupid it was, held hands and walked out to have lunch with each other.
Wow.
And what I had done is I had discovered the skill that is known as affect, AFFECT labeling. It was amazing. What I had just done was amazing. What I'd seen these people do with themselves was amazing. I know what I did, but I didn't know why it worked. So I started playing with it in other conflicts, and I got the same results. 2 years later, in 2007, a brain scanning study came out of UCLA, out of Matthew Lieberman's lab, showing exactly what happens in the human brain when affect labeling is occurring. And to keep it really simple and not geeky, basically what happens is when you're upset, the emotional centers of your brain overwhelm your prefrontal cortex. Daniel Goleman talked about this in the 90s in his book around emotional intelligence, talking about the amygdala hijack. Well, that actually happens. And the part of the brain that is most affected is a part of the brain called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. It turns out that part of the brain is where we create emotion, the abstract concept of emotion, the cognitive construct. And what the brain scanning study showed is as you are affect labeled, somebody's telling you what you're feeling, literally telling you what you're feeling, the emotional centers of the brain are inhibited while the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is activated. It's as if I was lending you my prefrontal cortex for the 90 seconds it would take you to calm down. And now there was the science to support the practice. And so I started teaching this, mostly teaching it to lawyers and mediators and retired judges and people, like going around the country to conferences. People heard about me, and this is really radical stuff and counterintuitive and counternormative. So I began teaching it. And eventually, 3 years later, I got a call from my dear friend Laurel Coffer, who was a mediator in Los Angeles, about 4 hours south from where I live. And she read a letter to me. So, you got a minute? I said, yeah. Let me read you this letter. And the letter was from a woman by the name of Susan Russo, who was serving a life sentence without possibility of parole in the largest, most violent prison in the world. And she was asking if Laurel would be willing to come into the prison and teach a group of women serving life sentences called the Networking Group how to become mediators and peacemakers to stop the prison violence, because they were tired of it. And Laurel knew that I lived pretty close to the prison, and of course she knew about my background with my master's degree and a second black belt. She's a perfect candidate to partner with me on this project. And so we did. And that the following April of 2000, that was in 2009, August of 2009, when she got the letter, we started the project in April of 2010 with 15 women. And that was the next big thing, big comma. It turned out we had no idea what would happen. It turned out to be the most transformative experience of my life.
Wow.
We're now in 15 California prisons. We're going to be soon to be in 9 prisons in Connecticut. We're in 3 prisons in Italy. I don't know, 13, 14 prisons in Greece. You know, I mean, and from 2010 to the pandemic, I was spending all my time driving to and going into prisons, all in California, working with people, primarily lifers and long-termers, teaching them how to become mediators and peacemakers. And I was doing this because I was getting so much pushback about this affect labeling, and people, the idea of telling a person how they feel and calming them down made no sense whatsoever. So I thought, well, if I can teach this to murderers, I can teach this to anyone. That's exactly what happened. In fact, today, I'm really proud of this number. We have about 700 of our students who were serving life and long-term sentences who have been released on parole in California. Only one of them has reoffended.
Wow.
And it's just a testament to how powerful these skills are. So that was kind of the next inflection point for me, because from 2000 to 2010, I was mediating and kind of doing that stuff. But all of a sudden now, I had the chance to really do something important. I didn't know at the time. I just felt, again, it felt right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I just have to acknowledge you too. I have to acknowledge you because, you know, all of this started with kind of a gut or an intuition in that very first example that you shared in Santa Barbara. Right. And then like it worked. You learned from it. You used it again. You started using it again. You started experimenting with it. It was interesting because you went an entirely different approach than a lot of people might prescribe. The academics and the science didn't come until afterwards. And what I hear you describing is you married rather your street cred, your street experience with the academics that followed. And that's kind of what started propelling this forward. All along, it was your intuition and your gut, it seems.
Well, it was, intuition is a really interesting thing. I teach all about intuition in my class, and intuition is nothing more than pattern recognition.
Okay.
And so when we feel like we've got a gut feeling, it's because our brain is getting information, seeing a pattern that it can't articulate. And it's leading us to a non-cognitive decision. We're not thinking about it, we're just feeling into it. But that's because the brain recognizes a pattern and sees an opportunity of some kind. Now, intuition can work really well for you if you understand it, but if you don't understand it, it can be disastrous. So the only time you should ever rely on an intuitive decision all by itself is when the risk of loss because of the decision is very low. In other words, you're not facing anything catastrophic. If you have, if it's a high risk situation or there's a lot at stake, then you can use intuition, but you got to use all the other decision-making tools as well, because the science shows that if you just rely on intuition, outside of your domain of expertise, in all likelihood, it's gonna be a bad outcome. So for me, in all these situations, you can just see how I was preparing myself. I didn't know what was going on, but I would have all this knowledge and expertise, and all of a sudden these patterns that obviously started to emerge. I saw them, recognized them at some level, and acted on it. And then that led me into the next gate. Okay, where's the next thing that's happening? So it goes from master's degree to becoming a peacemaker mediator, to learning about discovering affect labeling, to reading the science behind affect labeling, to now practicing affect labeling and proving how powerful it is in maximum security prisons for 3 years. I was teaching 500 or a couple hundred feet in Charles Manson's cell in a Corcoran State Prison.
Wow.
I mean, I was really in the belly of the beast.
I want to introduce the third question then, and kind of bring it back into you and your personal experience within all of this. And the question is, what did you learn about yourself? What were you learning about yourself through this process?
I would say that I learned about humility. Because remember, I told you earlier that because of my disabilities and the fact that I wasn't in the most, I was not in a bad family. I was in a very good family. but I needed a lot of emotional support that my parents just weren't able to give me. And I was hurt emotionally and cried myself to sleep a lot, and nobody understood what was going on with me. They didn't try to understand, and so I built up all these barriers. And one of the mechanisms was, of course, arrogance, and that carried over into law school and practice. And having a certain amount of arrogance as a trial lawyer is a good thing, I think. But it does not serve you well in any other aspect of your life, which is why so many lawyers get divorces and are alcoholics and have poor outcomes outside of professional life.
Well, and you wouldn't know this based on the fact that you haven't had a TV for 40 years, but what you've been missing is, do you know how many literally like serial shows out there are about lawyers and the exact same thing that you're describing? It makes for great television drama, actually. Show after show after show is all these lawyers kicking ass in court and just royally fucking it up at home.
That is reality for a lot of people. And fortunately, I escaped that route. However, the prison project, a couple of things started happening. One, I learned to be humble, working with people incarcerated for life, especially when we started working in the women's prison. Here are these women, and I walk in at 6'1" and 215 pounds, white, older Anglo-Saxon male. I was evil incarnate to them. Every bad thing that had ever happened to them because of somebody like me. And it was very humbling to me to go through that process. Not humiliating, just humbling. That was the first thing. The second thing is that I finally learned that service to humanity creates meaning in life for me. And that's where my happiness comes from. When I'm serving others and helping them grow and thrive and have peace in their lives, that gives me great satisfaction, creates meaning for me, and it makes my life worth living. So those are the two things that I really learned in the prison project. Working in the worst environments. These are not 5-star hotels and corporate conference rooms.
Right.
It was pretty dark. I mean, I remember when we first went into Corcoran, our first 4 classes, the men were shackled and in cages in a half circle around us. And they were in cages and we were teaching them in cages. That was pretty amazing.
And interesting. And I would venture to guess, tell me if I'm wrong, probably not even there by choice.
They were actually people self-select into the program. So we were offering the program to this was to men who were in the Supermax, and they were coming out of gangs, and they all had violent pasts, and we got with the warden, we decided, let's try prison of peace with the worst population in the prison that happens. And they heard about it, and we got 15 or 20 of them to say, okay, I'll try it and see what happens.
Okay. So that wasn't, the chains and the cages wasn't a matter of them being forced to be there. That was just literally the terms of their current incarceration, and that's how they had to show up.
For security reasons, they had to be that way because of who they were. And so, but they self-selected into the program. They decided this is something I want to try. And so,
which is part of the story in and of itself, right? Like, I guess I just really want to acknowledge you and your story for that, and that this isn't something that you're going out forcing on people. I mean, you're introducing this idea. People, first of all, it was requested of you in the first example, and then now as you're bringing it around, people are interested in this. I mean, people see the value in it.
Right. In every prison we go into, it's always self-selection. This is a new program. Sign up to see if you want to get in. And, we typically, we have an attrition rate of about 25%. But we end up with a core group of people who are able to become powerful peacemakers and mediators and stop the prison violence after about 2 or 3 years of training.
It also highlights for me, and I think this resonates in ways that go beyond what we have the time to share here, but it kind of reinforces this point that, I'm self-referencing for a moment. Do things because they're important and they matter to you.
Right.
First, and then do things because they are important and might matter to some people, but also don't underestimate the ripple effect that the influence can have, right? When you're doing things that matter to you and they resonate with people around you, that has a ripple effect. And that's exactly what you're describing is you're not going to be the one out there making peace. You're helping each person make peace and so on and so on and so forth, right?
That's right. What we learned, Paul, was that if we could train 25 people on a given prison yard of say 800 to 1,000 people in the yard, if we could train 25 of them to become mediators, prison violence disappeared on that yard.
Wow. Let me jump into the fourth question. You've shared so much so far, so let's continue before we get to the point of starting to wrap things up here. In addition to what you've already shared, what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this comma?
Well, I think probably the most remarkable thing is how happy I am. I don't make nearly as much money as I used to make as a trial lawyer. But I live in a beautiful part of the world in Central California. Like I said, I live between Yosemite and Kings Canyon, Sequoia National Parks, 10 acres. My wife is the most amazing human being in the world. She has her own practice as a spiritual guide and spiritual counselor, counsels people all over the world. I serve more people in a week than I served in 25 years as a lawyer. And that gives me great joy and happiness. And now I'm really excited. As I said, I'm turning 74 in a couple of weeks. And my passion going forward is teaching people the skills that I've learned so they can carry on beyond me. Because my promise to my clients is you will never have a fight or argument again in your life. You learn these skills. You'll know emotions will not scare you. You can calm any angry person in 90 seconds or less. Every conversation that might have been difficult in the past will now become transformative. If you're in leadership, you'll have leadership empathy of a type that people will want to follow you anywhere. You'll be able to build instant trust and loyalty and intimacy in your personal relationships. I mean, it is the foundational skill of life. And I get excited every morning thinking about how many people I get to serve every day doing that. I mean, this morning I was on a 3-hour webinar training 50 or so Arizona lawyers, these skills. And that's what I do. I mean, every day I'm webinaring or I'm talking or I'm teaching.
This theme of service, I mean, is very clear in your story that you've shared, because even in the origins of the shift for you, it was all in the, you weren't serving very many people, to the importance of service. And now look how many people you are serving. I mean, it's very clear how resonant that theme is for you.
Absolutely.
Nice.
It's really cool.
Let's ask the last of the 5 questions and then start to wrap it up. And you can be as brief as you want on this or elaborate more. What does getting off the comma look like for you?
The first thing that comes to my mind is just, it's kind of like a release of energy. So maybe being on the comma is a time of reflection, of absorbing energy. And then when the time is right, leaping off and releasing the energy and creating a whole new pathways for myself and for as many people as possible that I can touch. As I tell my students, when you learn how to listen other people into existence, every time you listen to somebody, you're throwing a pebble into the pond of peace. And if we get enough people throwing pebbles into that pond, we're going to have a tsunami of peace. And that's what our goal is. All of us collectively create that tsunami. Just by listening to each other.
I absolutely love that. It's so interesting that our paths would cross right now. This is literally by chance that your recording landed on this day and we're talking about this thing. I mean, obviously a lot of what you share is personal for me as a life coach. And I've always kind of been that empathetic, kind of feelings forward person who was concerned about how other people felt and how included they were. But I'm learning at the age of 54 in this particular season of my life. I have my work all of these different things that I do in work are all kind of starting to center around the power of listening. In fact, the podcast itself is an example of that, just in what we do, but also kind of showing people examples of what it's like to ask questions and listen. Right. So
Right.
you've definitely got my interest for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the secret to listening is knowing what to listen for.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people that what I teach is ignore the words, read the emotions, reflect back the emotions with the use feeling.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And when you do that, you get that effect that we saw in Lieberman's 2007 study. You can calm people down, build an instant trust and loyalty. Think of it this way. How many people have truly been heard in their life by another human being? Almost nobody. And if you can give this priceless gift of validating somebody, of listening them into existence, it costs you nothing to do it. Maybe 90 seconds or 120 seconds. You give this priceless gift. And then that makes that person want to learn and share. And it just expands. And I mean, I look at the polarizations going on and all the crap and bullshit really literally going on that I just shake my head, as I'm sure any right-minded person does. It's all unnecessary. We don't have to rely on political leaders to either lead us into darkness or lead us into light. I have found in my experience that most political leaders are really political followers. And so it's incumbent on us as people, members of a community, to learn the skills that will truly bring peace into our lives, truly cause happiness, truly cause respect. We can have massive disagreements over just about everything, but we can always respect each other. And that's something that it's a skill that you have to learn. But when you learn the skill, then it doesn't matter what people believe.
Right. Well,
because you're looking at them as a human being, and their beliefs and structure, whatever they are, even if they're, antithetical to everything that you think, you can still respect them as a human being.
It's the acknowledgement, right? And that's just it. It's decentering yourself for one moment and letting somebody else literally be heard, be seen, and just be validated, right? And what you're talking about, I mean, obviously this resonates with me, but it feels like we're in the midst of a very big shift. A lot of people are talking about this and writing about this and sharing about this. But, I think this kind of last 100 years, at least in this country, of what we define leadership as is shifting. People are being disillusioned by it. People are starting to recognize that it's the community that matters in the village, and that we actually can solve some of our own problems, many of our own problems, right? So,
But we have to be willing to learn the skills.
Yes.
Which is not something that's innate. It's not automatic. It's not something that you're going to figure out on your own. You need to be taught how to do it, and you need to practice. Like riding a bicycle. You could never. It'd be really hard to learn how to ride a bicycle by yourself. There are people who figured it out back when bicycles were invented in the 19th century. But for most people, learning how to ride a bicycle without training wheels and without dad there or somebody to hold you, it would be very difficult. It's the same thing with listening. It's a skill. It's a set of skills. They're not difficult to learn, but you have to be committed to learning them.
Yeah. And they're not traditionally taught. They're not traditionally taught through our academic systems, and they're not traditionally taught or modeled well in our family and community systems either.
Right. And as I tell people, think about it. From the time you were a tiny child, you were ordered to listen. You were ordered to listen. You were ordered to behave. You were ordered to only feel certain emotions and not display or show other emotions. In school, you were ordered to listen. At work, you're ordered to listen. You're never taught to listen. And so nobody ever hears you.
Well, and I would even add to that, you were ordered to listen. And even if you did manage to, because kids pick up on things, they notice things innately, right? You're ordered to listen, but you're not acknowledged or celebrated for the thing that comes naturally afterwards, which is the curiosity, the questions, right? And do as I say, not as I do. So
that's right.
We're not modeled, right? Doug, we could talk so much more. There is no limit to what we could explore. And I do regret that we don't have that time. But For folks who are just dying to look you up, find out where you are, what you're up to, maybe connect with you, I'll put all of your links in the show notes. Walk us through a couple of places where people can find you and potentially reach out.
All you got to do is Google me, Douglas Noll or Doug Noll, and you'll find out more about me than you ever want to know. You can read about my profile is a very detailed profile on LinkedIn. That's a good place to start. My website, dougnoll.com, is a good place to start. I am a one-man show. I don't have an entourage. I answer all my own emails, and I'm really good on Zoom calls. So if you're listening and you want to learn more, you can email me at doug@dougnoll.com, DOUGNOLL.com. If you go to my website, on the contact page, there's a button where you can just schedule a Zoom call with me, or you can email me and say, hey, let's schedule, or message me on the LinkedIn. Okay. And I'll send you my scheduling link and we can have a chat. And I'm willing to talk to everybody and anybody about this work. And, how can I serve you? That's really going to be the question. What brings you to me today? How can I serve you?
Great.
And that's the conversation.
Great. And we have all those links there in the show notes. I encourage everybody to go there and check them out, as well as what's coming next, which is, Doug, the last thing we do before we sign off is, because you're being here today and sharing your story with us is all about supporting this idea of learning from each other. We don't need, heroes, celebrities, experts to tell us how to live our lives. In hearing each other's stories, we can take what we need. You're an example of that today. And we couldn't do that without also giving you an opportunity to give a voice to other causes, people, creators that matter to you. So we call this acknowledgements, and it's your opportunity to give a voice to, boost, or lift up somebody else that matters in your circle. Who would you acknowledge today? And we'll put their descriptions and links in the show notes.
Well, I guess 3 acknowledgements would be important to me. One, my wife, Alea Dow, who is an amazing woman and a power unto herself, who has transformed the lives of thousands of people with her wisdom as an ascended master. I would also acknowledge my deep friend and colleague, Laurel Coffer, because she co-founded Prison of Peace with me. And I would, of course, acknowledge the thousands and thousands of people we have trained in Prison of Peace who are still behind bars and who have been released, who have seen their lives transformed by learning and practicing the kinds of skills we've been talking about today. And they are the living embodiment of what is possible when you take the time to learn how to truly become a peacemaker.
And it seems like I would even add, if that's okay, and they're kind of the proof and the evidence as well, right?
That's right.
So, Doug, thank you so much for sharing with us. Obviously, I encourage everyone to go to the show notes and check out the acknowledgements and find Doug. And I am so grateful for what you've shared and your story and your vulnerability. And I wish you the best of weeks ahead and look forward to, everything that comes from here.
Well, thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
Have a great week. What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma. And feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.